all wish to live a more happy life. So today I'm going to explore some data that might give me some clues as to how to have a more satisfied existence. So I'm going to bring in some data that I have that shows satisfaction levels. And here I can see my data. I'm going to bring this into SAP Lumira. And when I bring this data into Lumira, I see that there are a number of semantic elements automatically detected that I can enrich. So I see in my data that I have a dimension showing the percentage of the population that is satisfied, the percentage that has sex at least once a week, the GDP of the country, and also the population of the country. Now, the other thing I see here is that there is a country dimension, and country, because it's a geographic element, I can create a hierarchy here. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a hierarchy based on country. And actually what I notice is that this data has some issues. There's some spelling issues. So I'm not going to create my data hierarchy quite yet. I'm going to go back into my data manipulation tools, and let's just fix these elements. So New Zealand is spelled with an A. And so we'll fix that quickly. And then the other element is the Switzerland with two R's. I'm going to fix that quickly. And now my data should be updated. Let's go back and try that again. I'm going to create my geographic hierarchy here, doing this by country. Now, I'm not quite sure if this Hong Kong is the one in China, but I will validate that that is the case. And so now my data is all set up. I've got it so that I can view it by country. And I'm really ready now to start visualizing my data. So if I come in and I look at something like a traditional visualization, like a bar chart, I could look at by country how satisfied people are, and I could start looking at variables like the GDP, the love lives of the inhabitants, how large the populations of these countries are. And what I can see here is that I do have this data and it is visual. I can see there's some things like a country here, or the US, where the GDP is quite high compared to the satisfaction level. But it's really hard for me to interpret how these elements work together to drive satisfaction. So I'm going to choose a different kind of visualization. Now, this is geographic data, so why don't I try something like a map chart? So here I'm taking a look at by country how satisfied the people are. And again, this is telling me a little bit about how the satisfaction rates from one country to another, but it's not really a good format for me to look at how these variables work together to drive satisfaction. So I'm going to move over and look at a bubble chart. So here in my bubble chart, again, I'm looking by country and I'm going to look at how satisfied people are. I'm going to bring in something like our GDP. So now I'm looking at how satisfied countries are as well as how wealthy they are. So you can see on my satisfaction dimension, actually the countries that are highest on the satisfaction dimension are down here, and they're kind of at the bottom of my GDP dimension. And we've got a couple of countries I can even just filter down and see who they are. A couple of countries with the highest GDPs, and those are the United States and Japan. And those countries actually are sort of mid to low on the satisfaction level. So I'm starting to understand here that it's not necessarily wealth that drives satisfaction. So let's bring in another variable. Let's take out the GDP and let's see if having an active love life helps you to be more satisfied. And again, what I see here is these countries sort of at the top of my satisfaction level are sort of, average, lowish in terms of having time to get physical. Wow, this country down here, very lowest on the satisfaction scale. Japan also, guess not the place for romance there. So let me take out this filter and go back and look at my complete picture. But now what if I wanted to see if maybe the wealth of the country had something to do with how much time the inhabitants of the country have for getting physical? And here what I can see is now I've brought in the GDP to show the bubble width. Now what I see here is countries with the larger GDP are kind of low in love life. Countries that are higher in the love life are lower on GDP. But neither love life nor GDP seems to be a big factor in being one of the more satisfied countries in the world. So that's very interesting. I'm going to bring in some other data that I have that might help me understand a little bit more about how to be more satisfied. So I'm going to bring in a data set here. If all of the love lives could lead to having children. So I'm going to bring in some data I have on children, and I'm going to merge that data with the existing satisfaction data I have. And now I'm going to go back and visualize that. So again, I'm still visualizing this by country, and I'm looking at my satisfaction level. I need to enrich my data to bring in my children as a measure. So now I'm going to look at satisfaction and number of children per family. And here's very interesting. Now I see these countries that are most satisfied, my top 3 countries by satisfaction, also are pretty high in terms of having children. And those are actually India, Mexico, and Nigeria. So this is starting to give me a clue. And some of these countries that are sort of lower on the satisfaction scale also are lower in the number of children. So that's France, Hong Kong, and Japan. So now I'm seeing that children may be an indication. And in fact, let's take a look. If we add in our GDP, do you necessarily have to be wealthy to be happy with your families? And sure enough, it looks like here my top countries that are really lots of children, quite satisfied, are not really the wealthiest countries. India, Malaysia, Mexico, Nigeria, and South Africa. So this is starting to be quite revealing. But I know there are some other things that can make people happy, not just money and children. So I'm going to bring in another data set that could give me some additional clues about whether people are happy. And this is a data set that shows the consumption of wine and chocolate. So let's bring that data in. And again, I'm going to merge that data with my existing data set and enrich my attributes here. So now let's visualize this. So here I've got my viewing by country. I'm looking at satisfaction level. And let's take a look at the satisfaction level of countries that have high wine consumption. And I'll have to see where Canada is somewhere in there. Now, interestingly enough, my top 3 satisfied countries have very, very low wine consumption. And in fact, looking at my top 3 countries that have high wine consumption, they're sort of at the lower end or mid to low end of my satisfaction scale. So that's France, Italy, and Switzerland are drinking plenty of wine, but not necessarily that happy, which is a huge surprise to me. Well, let's see. I think some people get happy from chocolate. So let's take a look at our chocolate consumption. And again, what I'm seeing here is my happiest countries are pretty low on the chocolate scale. I've got some countries pretty high on the chocolate scale, and they're pretty moderate in terms of their happiness. So this is Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. So moderately happy, but eating lots of chocolate there. So that is interesting. And why don't I see how many countries are eating chocolate and drinking wine together? So the country I think drinking the most wine and eating some chocolate, France. Up here in Switzerland, that sounds like a pretty good place to me because they're eating lots of chocolate and drinking quite a bit of wine and sort of moderately happy. But again, these countries that are here, my top happiness level, are really having hardly any chocolate at all, hardly any wine at all, and they are the most happy. So, what does this lead me to believe? Well, if you are spending your time working and becoming a wealthy country, that doesn't necessarily mean you are the happiest country. Having an active love life, again, does not necessarily mean you are a happy country. And having wine and chocolate to consume, pretty good, But again, not the biggest determination in being happy. The happiest countries really don't have much money, have moderate love lives, and not much wine or chocolate at all, but what they have is children. So perhaps what we should do in pursuit of happiness is spend more time with our friends and our families.